You don't expect your son to laugh when someone hits you with a broom, especially not when it's your daughter-in-law doing it. But he did. He laughed like it was an accident, like I'd slipped on a rug instead of being struck across the shoulder. I didn't call the police. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there and realized, in a house where I had given up everything to feel safe, I was now completely disposable. When I sold my ceramic studio, people thought I was retiring. "You've earned your rest," they said. "Time to let others take care of you." What they didn't know was that selling that studio felt like pulling up the roots of who I was. I'd opened Loretta's Kiln when I was 39, right after my husband died. It was how I raised Jason. While I was shaping clay, he was in the back room coloring inside shipping boxes and napping on piles of bubble wrap. That place was our world for decades. I ran it alone, 7 days a week for 35 years. Through heartbreaks, heat waves, arthritis, and one mild stroke, I kept it going because it kept me going. But after the stroke last winter, Jason insisted I move in with him and Sierra. "Just for a little while," he said. "You need a break." Truthfully, I was tired. Not of the work, but of being alone with my body slowing down. I thought being near family would be comforting, like letting your feet finally rest after a long walk. So I said yes. I packed my things into 6 cardboard boxes and gave my keys to the young woman who'd been apprenticing with me. "It's your turn," I told her, smiling too wide. I didn't cry that day. I didn't cry for many days. I just kept telling myself, this is what love looks like when you're older. You step back so others can move forward. The first week at Jason's house was quiet. Too quiet. They gave me the basement room. It smelled of old detergent and had one tiny lamp in the corner. There were no windows, just a low ceiling and a narrow twin bed. "It's temporary," Sierra said. "Once we clean up the guest room upstairs, we'll move you." I believed her. That was my mistake. Sierra was polite, not warm, not unkind, just polite in that corporate, practiced way. She handed me a color-coded house guidelines list taped to the fridge. Quiet hours, 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. No strong scented products. No cooking after 8. No guests without prior approval. At the bottom, a tiny smiley face, like it was a play date and not a set of restrictions on how to exist. Jason, my son, the boy who once cried when I scraped my knee, he didn't question any of it. He just said, "You know how she is. Organized." Organized. That word wrapped around my throat like a hand. Every night I laid on that stiff bed and listened to the hum of the dryer upstairs and the groan of the pipes above my head. I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how I went from being a homeowner, a businesswoman, a mother, to being extra. Still, I tried. I cooked for them twice a week. I folded laundry, picked up groceries. I tried to feel useful. But Sierra never thanked me directly. And Jason started talking to me like I was just another task in his day. One afternoon, I overheard them in the kitchen while I was dusting the living room. "She's not going back to that shop, right?" Sierra asked. "No, she signed everything over," Jason replied. "Once we get the paperwork in place, we'll have full access. I just want to make sure the will is cleaned up too." I stopped moving. My duster froze mid-air. My own son planning my estate like I was already fading. I didn't confront them. I didn't shout or cry. Instead, I returned to the basement and wrote in my old notebook, "They are not ungrateful. They are calculating." I was love to them until I became real estate. The next morning, Emma, my granddaughter, snuck into the basement before school. She held a drawing she made, a little clay vase with sunflowers. "This is your shop, right?" she asked. I nodded. "Mom says you were good at it." I smiled. I was. She left me the drawing. I taped it on the wall beside my bed. It reminded me I used to create things people wanted to hold. That week, Sierra asked if I could review a few routine legal documents, power of attorney, health directive, title updates, just in case. I nodded and took the folder. I didn't sign it. I tucked it in the drawer and told her I needed more time. That night, I pulled out my husband's old lawyer contact. He passed years ago, but his attorney had helped us with our wills when Jason was still in high school. I made a call, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel small. They thought I was just a tired old woman taking up space. They didn't know I'd built an entire life from nothing once, and I could do it again. This wasn't going to be a loud revenge story. No shouting, no police, no Facebook posts, just paper, signatures, and silence. And that would be enough. The cup broke in 3 clean pieces. It wasn't even a valuable one, just a chipped ceramic mug I'd bought at a thrift store years ago. I'd placed it too close to the edge of the counter while rinsing raspberries for Emma, and it tipped over like it had decided to give up. I knelt down to pick up the shards, careful not to cut myself. I didn't even hear Sierra walk in. All I felt was a sharp thud on my shoulder blade, a quick, cold jab. It wasn't the bristled end of the broom, it was the handle. Wood. Direct. Deliberate. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She just said, almost like she was talking to a dog, "You need to be more careful. We can't have glass all over the floor." I didn't move. I stayed on my knees. One hand frozen midair, holding a jagged piece of ceramic, the other gripping the dustpan. My eyes burned, but I refused to blink. Then I heard him. Jason. He was leaning against the doorway, peeling a banana like it was any other Tuesday. He didn't gasp. He didn't say, "Hey," or "What the hell, Sierra?" He smirked, not cruelly, just like it was mildly funny. Then he said, "Mom, don't call 911, all right? You know how Sierra gets when she's stressed." And then he walked off, chewing. That was the moment something in me cracked. Not out of pain, but out of realization. My son had watched his wife hit me and treated it like a minor inconvenience, like I'd spilled milk or dropped keys. Not like someone had struck the woman who raised him, who stayed up all night sewing costumes for school plays, who kept the electricity on by selling handmade mugs at farmers markets when we couldn't afford diapers. I swept the broken cup into the bin and kept wiping long after the floor was clean. I wiped as if I could scrub away what just happened, but the shame didn't budge. That evening, Emma came downstairs with a first aid kit. She said nothing, just opened the box, pulled out a cold compress, and placed it gently on my shoulder. Her small hand hovered a second longer than needed. Then she whispered, "You didn't do anything wrong." I nodded, but the truth was I didn't feel innocent. I felt erased. Later, I tried to explain the incident to Jason, not to cause a fight, just to speak it out loud. He interrupted me halfway. "Sierra said she barely tapped you. You probably just startled yourself. Look, can we not make this into drama?" Drama, that's what he called it. Not disrespect, not violence, not betrayal, just drama. I stared at him across the dinner table. He was the same boy who used to beg me to stay in his room until he fell asleep because the dark made him nervous. And now, he looked at me like I was a burden that kept messing up the schedule. I didn't bring it up again. What was the point? They saw me as fragile, confused, overreacting, and worst of all, they saw me as powerless. You know, when I was younger, I used to think respect was something that just came with time. That if you lived a good life, helped people, raised your kids right, you'd be cherished. But time doesn't guarantee anything, except that people will stop pretending if they never really valued you to begin with. And I wonder, if you're watching this right now, maybe folding laundry or cooking dinner, and you've ever felt like the walls of your own family home started closing in on you. Have you ever had a moment where you realized you're being tolerated instead of treasured? If that hits somewhere soft, you're not alone. Go ahead and leave a comment if you've ever been made to feel small in a place where you once gave everything. It's not just my revenge story, it's ours too. The next few days blurred. Sierra pretended nothing happened. Jason avoided eye contact. Emma hugged me a little tighter at bedtime. One night, while I was organizing old mail on the hallway table, I noticed a manila envelope labeled Deed, Review, and Transfer. Inside were copies of the property papers, with Jason and Sierra's names already filled into the new ownership line. Mine left blank. I placed it back where I found it. Then I sat alone at the kitchen table and stared at my hands. These hands had pulled my son out of the bathtub when he nearly drowned at 3. They'd built a business from clay and ash. They'd braided Emma's hair before school. These hands were steady, strong, still mine. They would not be signing anything. Not until I decided what story I wanted to finish with. I started keeping my suitcase half-packed, not because I planned to run, not yet, but because something inside me whispered that staying too long would finish whatever part of me hadn't already disappeared. At first, I only noticed the little things. My name vanished from mail. Sierra began calling the basement that extra room. Jason told someone on the phone that the house had no permanent guests. When I cooked dinner, they said thanks without looking up. When I didn't cook, no one asked why. And I stopped asking anything too. The lines that defined me, mother, grandmother, woman of the house, they blurred into silence. Every morning, I'd make coffee, take it back to the basement, and drink it alone beside the space heater. There was no dresser, no closet, no mirror, just a small shelf where I lined up the 5 ceramic mugs I'd managed to keep. I used one each day, not because I needed variety, but to remind myself that I still had something to choose. Sierra's rules increased, slowly but firmly. Please wash bedding weekly became no use of the washer after 4 p.m., then no food in the basement, then no guests at all. I didn't argue. I just folded the printed notes and tucked them into my cardigan pocket. I carried them like receipts for a role I no longer applied for. One evening, Emma found me folding laundry in the hallway. She tilted her head and asked, "Are you living here or visiting?" I froze. "I guess I'm somewhere in between," I said. She nodded like she understood too well for a 10-year-old. Then she whispered, "You can come sit with me when Mom's in a mood. I don't like when the house gets that quiet." That night, I wrote in my notebook, "There are people who yell when they want control, and there are people who whisper." Sierra never raises her voice, but somehow she's erased mine completely. I started overhearing more than I should. Jason spoke on the phone with someone about updating next of kin documents. Sierra mentioned consolidating bank accounts for simplicity. I knew what it meant. I knew their tone, the calm one people use when they think they've already won. And still, I said nothing. Instead, I called a locksmith, a friend of my husband's, someone who owed me a favor. I didn't ask for much, just copies of some keys I'd quietly held onto. He didn't ask why. That was the kind of friend William had kept. A few days later, I climbed to the attic while they were at work. Sierra had told me once it was too dusty for someone with breathing issues. I didn't ask whose. I just nodded and never brought it up again. But I remembered. The attic door creaked like it was remembering me. I moved slowly, brushing aside old boxes and bags labeled holiday stuff, and Jason, college. In the far corner, tucked beneath a broken lamp, I found a bin labeled Mom, old papers. Inside were things they must have cleared from my storage when I moved in. My late husband's pocket notebook, the original deed to our old home, a draft of his last will, with my name written clear as morning, and between the pages, something I had forgotten even existed, a letter from William. His handwriting was shaky, but familiar. "If they ever make you feel small, don't argue. Just walk away with your name still whole. You've given enough." I sat in the attic's dusty light, hands trembling. I wasn't angry, I wasn't broken, I was done pretending I didn't see what was happening. Later that week, Sierra scheduled a family meeting. The living room looked staged, folder on the table, tea steaming, a notepad waiting. Jason gestured to the empty chair. "Mom, we were thinking, maybe it's time to move you into the upstairs guest room. It's sunnier, easier for Emma to stop by." I nodded slowly. "That sounds lovely." Sierra smiled, tight, professional. "Also, just to make things easier, we were hoping you'd consider adding our names to the house paperwork. Just the deed. That way, if anything happens, there won't be confusion." I picked up the pen and folder. "Of course," I said. Jason let out a breath like he hadn't even realized he was holding it. Sierra relaxed into her chair. I smiled, folded the folder shut, and placed it in my lap. "I'll just give it a read tonight," I added. "Make sure I understand everything." They nodded. No one noticed my hands had stopped shaking. That night, I opened the deed from the attic and placed it beside the one in the new folder. They weren't the same. Theirs was a draft. Mine was the real one. Already filed, already protected, already secure. I pulled out a manila envelope I had prepped days ago. Inside were notarized copies, signed and dated, transferring my assets into a private trust I had quietly established. One they didn't know existed. The lawyer? Same one who had helped me and William all those years ago. Turns out she was still practicing and very much remembered me. I slid the envelope into my suitcase next to my journal and Emma's sunflower drawing. Not much else needed to come with me. In the morning, I woke before the sun, brewed a quiet cup of coffee, and looked around the basement one last time. No notes, no announcement, no drama. Just one woman, packing up the last pieces of herself from a home where she had become invisible. Because disappearing isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing you'll ever do. I didn't pack in a rush. I didn't throw things into a bag like in the movies with violin music swelling in the background and tears on my face. No, I folded each item carefully, one cardigan at a time, one book at a time. The rhythm of it was almost peaceful. I had already made the decision before I moved a single thing, not just to leave, but to live the rest of my life without begging to be seen. That was the real shift. It happened in the attic. That dusty, forgotten space where they'd shoved boxes with my name on them. I'd gone up there looking for an old recipe book and found something else entirely, a folder labeled William Legal. Inside, his handwriting still curved the way it always had, leaning left like it was bracing against wind. And there it was, in black and white, the original will, never revoked, never touched. My name, clear. Sole inheritor. There was a sticky note folded into the back of the folder. I recognized the color before I even read it. William had used those pale blue ones at the shop for marking prices on pottery. If they ever try to shrink you down to fit their comfort, don't let them. You're not made of porcelain, Loretta. You're fire-hardened clay. Write your own ending. I must have read that line 10 times before I let myself exhale. You know, I think we all want to believe that if we just love hard enough, give long enough, someone will look back and say, you mattered, you made this better. But sometimes all you get is a broom across the back and a son who laughs. And still, somehow, we stay. We linger in hopes that they'll come around. We make excuses. We say, she's stressed. He didn't mean it. But eventually there comes a moment when the excuses run out. For me, that moment was quiet. It didn't come with shouting or slamming doors. It came with a whisper in my chest, you don't belong here anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. And in that clarity, I called the lawyer William, and I had trusted for decades, Leanne Park. She remembered me right away. She told me she still had the file on record, and she still had my back. I didn't need to explain much. I just said, it's time. We met in the back corner of a little diner she liked near the highway. Over black coffee and a slice of pie, she helped me finalize the trust. She made sure the house couldn't be touched, the assets couldn't be transferred, and that my decisions would be honored no matter what Jason or Sierra claimed later. By the time we finished, she reached across the table, rested her hand on mine, and said, I'm proud of you, Loretta. And I believed her. When I got back to the house, I went straight to the basement and opened my suitcase. I laid in the letter from William. I tucked in the signed papers from Leanne. I placed Emma's drawing between them. It was all I needed. For the next 2 days, I moved through the house like a ghost. Sierra and Jason assumed everything was settled, that I was going to sign their version of the deed soon. Sierra even baked banana bread one morning and offered me a slice like we were best friends. I smiled and took it, polite to the end. Emma, though, kept watching me. Her eyes followed me like she knew something was coming. She wasn't afraid, just alert, like she'd decided, in her own quiet way, to stay on my side, no matter where that side ended up. One afternoon, while Sierra was out at a yoga class and Jason was upstairs on a Zoom call, I slipped into the kitchen. The table was covered in paperwork, mostly Sierra's budgeting notes and calendar reminders. Taped to the fridge was another new rule. Please remove shoes at the door, especially guests. I stared at the word guests. It echoed louder than anything else in the room. I wasn't a guest in my own son's life. I wasn't a guest in the house my husband's will had protected. I wasn't a guest in the world I had helped build with my bare hands. I was done being politely erased. That night, I opened my laptop, one of the only things I hadn't left behind from my old life. The password was still the same, Kiln 1987. The screen lit up like it was welcoming me back. I created a folder titled Second Chapter. I scanned the trust documents. I saved Emma's drawing. I wrote a new note to myself. I am not disappearing. I am choosing to be seen, just not by them. I zipped my suitcase shut before dawn. As I moved through the house one last time, I stopped at the mirror in the hallway. For a moment, I barely recognized myself. Not because of age, but because for the first time in years, I looked like someone who knew what she wanted. And what I wanted was peace. Not to punish them, not to prove anything, just peace. Peace that didn't need permission. Peace that wasn't earned by suffering. Peace that came quietly and stayed. I left just before sunrise. No note, no goodbye, no long dramatic walk up the stairs with a suitcase thumping behind me. Just the quiet zip of my coat, the soft creak of the basement door, and the faint hum of the refrigerator still running in a house that no longer needed me. The sky was still gray-blue when I stepped outside. The grass was damp. The air held that stillness only found in early morning. My suitcase rolled behind me like it had done this before. I didn't look back. Not because I was bitter. I just didn't want to give that house the power of a second glance. I took the early bus to the edge of town. No one else was on it, just a man in a delivery uniform who nodded at me like I was part of the furniture. That felt oddly right. I'd spent the last year being invisible. What was one more ride? But when I stepped off and stood in front of my old ceramic studio, I didn't feel invisible at all. It was still there. The windows dusty, the sign faded, the lock a little rusted, but it stood, like it had waited for me without complaint. The key slid in like it always had. I stepped inside, and the air hit me like memory, earthy, dry, and full of clay dust. That smell, it was like shaking hands with an old friend. The shelves were bare, but I could see the ghosts of every mug, every vase, every handprint from a child's art class. It didn't feel like a ruin. It felt like possibility. I didn't call anyone, didn't post anything. I just rolled up my sleeves, opened the back window to let in the light, and started wiping things down. It took a few days to sweep the floors, patch a few leaks, and scrub the studio sink until it gleamed again. I slept on an old cot in the back office, made coffee with a plug-in kettle, and used the bathroom at the gas station 2 blocks down. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was intruding. I called Leanne to update her. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just said, "Where do you want the official trust documents mailed?" I told her to send them to the studio. "I'm reopening," I added. "Back to selling pots and planters?" she asked, half teasing. "Not exactly," I said. "This time, I'm not selling anything." I spent the next week hanging handwritten flyers at coffee shops and libraries. Second Chapter, a gathering place for women starting over free coffee, free clay, no pressure. At first, no one came. Then one Tuesday morning, an older woman in a knit hat peeked through the door. Her name was Nora. She used to teach piano. She had moved in with her daughter after hip surgery, but now slept in the laundry room because her daughter's new boyfriend needed the guest room. We had coffee. We didn't talk much. The next day, she brought a friend, Esther. Then came June, then Patty, then a woman named Marina, who didn't speak much English but brought photos of her grandchildren taped into a journal. They didn't come for clay. They came for space, for the kind of silence that heals instead of punishes, for eye contact, for someone to say, "You're not crazy, you're not a burden." I started calling it The Table, a wide wooden table in the center of the studio, once used for hand-building bowls, now surrounded by women telling the quiet parts of their lives out loud. I didn't tell them my story in full. I didn't need to. Sometimes I just said, "I used to live somewhere I didn't fit." And they nodded like they knew every detail. Emma sent me a letter 3 weeks after I left. The envelope was crayon-colored, the handwriting wobbly but careful. Inside was a bookmark she'd made from cardboard and glitter glue. It read, "I believe you." I cried for the first time in months, not because I was sad, but because someone still saw me, even if that someone was only 10 years old. I framed that bookmark, hung it by the door, a reminder that I hadn't disappeared. I had just walked into a room no one else knew existed. One Sunday afternoon, while wiping down shelves, I caught a glimpse of myself in the dusty studio mirror. I looked older, sure, but not worn down, not erased. There was something settled in my shoulders, a steadiness I hadn't felt in years, the kind that comes when you stop asking to be included and start choosing where to stand. This wasn't revenge, not in the way people expect. I didn't scream, I didn't sue, I didn't burn anything down. But they had a plan, and I walked out of it. And when I left, their plan quietly collapsed. When the regional news crew arrived, I wasn't expecting them. There was no marquee outside my old studio announcing my name. I was just arranging a row of freshly fired mugs on the sill when the door chimed. 2 young women with a camera and a clipboard stepped in. "Ms. Ames?" one asked. I nodded, wiping clay dust from my fingers. They said they'd heard about the second chapter gathering space from a community bulletin. Would I mind sharing a few words on camera? I agreed, though I didn't show my face. Instead, they filmed my hands as I mixed glaze and layered it onto a wide bowl. My voice spoke softly in the background. This is where women come to rebuild, to reclaim what they lost under someone else's roof. It aired that Thursday evening, and within hours my phone started buzzing. Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, more than 30 women had signed up for our Friday workshop, twice our usual turnout. There were notes slipped under the door, "Thank you for believing in us." I've never felt this free. A donation jar filled with little scraps of paper carrying names and brief stories. I nearly lost my home after Dad's second marriage. My daughter took my savings. I thought I was alone. I read each one in silence, tucked them into a wooden box labeled Hope, and filed them for the day I might share them. Collectively, they formed a quiet chorus of resilience. Back at the house where I once lived, I learned that my story had shaken Jason and Sierra more than I realized. Their neighbor dropped by to tell me she overheard Sierra sobbing on the phone one night. "They lost everything. I can't believe she did this to us." Jason, I was told, spent an entire afternoon pacing the living room, staring at the muted TV image of my hands shaping clay. He finally whispered, "I wanted this to be our family's legacy," before hanging up on his own brother. Despite their initial strategy to quietly assume my property, they never imagined I'd hold the legal advantage, and that my silence would be the most powerful thing I wielded. But the most meaningful moment came when Emma walked back through my studio door on a crisp Sunday morning. She hesitated at the threshold, clutching a coffee cup I recognized from my shelf. She smiled shyly and said, "I thought you might like this." Inside was a small mug she'd painted herself, a sunflower on one side, and on the other, in careful cursive, "I believe you." She slid the mug into my hand. For a moment, I was speechless. Not because of the words, but because her simple act reminded me that true recognition often comes from the smallest voices. In her eyes, I saw the truth I'd longed for, that I belonged, not as a guest or a burden, but as someone worthy of care and respect. That afternoon, I invited a few women from the group to help me organize a book corner in the studio. Handed down novels, legal guides on elder rights, journals for new participants. One by one, they placed their books on the shelf, each title a testament to a chapter in their own lives. Good Morning Vietnam, A Widow's Truth, Finding My Voice. A handful of younger women, hearing about us through social media shares, dropped by to learn how they could support older relatives facing similar struggles. I realized then that the second chapter wasn't just a space for survival, it was a bridge between generations. In the following weeks, a local women's shelter reached out to partner. They wanted to hold legal clinics in my studio, so survivors of financial or emotional abuse could get pro bono advice. I agreed. On a rainy Tuesday, we welcomed an attorney who sat at the table and answered questions about power of attorney, wills, and protective orders. One woman, trembling as she spoke, whispered, "They told me I'd never manage my own money. Now I know I can." She pressed my hand and said, "You gave me my confidence back." It struck me then that my journey, from the basement of my son's house to the center of community care, had created ripples far beyond what I ever imagined. And somewhere in all of this, between the notes of gratitude, the quiet afternoon workshops, and the hum of the kilns firing, I found my own peace. I didn't need a public apology from Jason or Sierra, nor did I crave a spotlight. Their plans had collapsed in silence, and that was punishment enough. I had reclaimed my life on my own terms, shaped my own narrative out of clay and community, and discovered that the loudest victories often arrive without fanfare. To everyone watching this story, if you've ever felt erased or undervalued in your own home, remember this: your second chapter is waiting. You don't need permission to start it. Share your experience in the comments, because someone out there might be waiting to hear your voice and find their strength through yours.